There is nothing more frustrating than a nutrition client that you're working with that's excited to work with you, that's going down the path of this life-changing service that you can't help get results. And there's a bunch of reasons why this happens. Sometimes it's hard to get them to stick what they need to. It's hard to figure out the right level of food on an individualized basis for them. It's tough to keep them motivated. Things could get out of the way. Maybe they don't fully understand the check-in process or how this works or why they need to be doing certain things. Maybe there's some resistance around all that stuff. It can be really, really frustrating. This isn't always the case. I would say, if anything, um, it's uncommon, but it does happen. So if you're experiencing this, number one, I want you to know that you're not alone. And it does happen. I think a lot of times we think about, you know, either coaches or people in the space talk about, when things are going really, really well, and maybe don't highlight when things aren't going so well with clients. And we got to do a better job of that. So everyone learns and knows that they're not alone, as well as there is, support and guidance that you can get. And that's why I have mentors. That's why I'm in coaching groups. That's why I reach out to people to troubleshoot, because sometimes we need to bounce ideas off people. We need to lean into people that have been there before. We need to hear other coaches say these things and deliver these type of messages, so that we can get our clients to do the things we need to do. So it's really, really important that we chat these scenarios out and go from there. On my email list, I asked you guys about a few scenarios that you were dealing with and maybe you needed help with. So I wanted to work through those today. But if there's anything specifically you guys have right now as you're watching the live, you have questions on or want to chat a little bit more about, by all means, ask me. Let's talk about it and go from there. If you're tuning in today, you want to drop a comment in the comments, let me know that you're here. That would be amazing. Hitting the like button on this stuff also makes the video go farther and stuff. So I'd appreciate that as well. And before we dive into these scenarios today, the Dr. Mark Method program right now is currently closed for enrollment, but we do have a few opportunities to check out what we're all about and work with us. And one of those is that free 3-day challenge, especially that quick start challenge to get things moving and rolling. If you haven't yet downloaded that, let me grab the link as I chat here, because that could be a good opportunity for you guys to get started and go from there. But as we talk, is there any scenarios that maybe you're struggling with, be it yourself? That's totally cool. That's fair game. Or a client you just are having a hard time getting some results with. Is there anything like that at all, guys? No? Let me just drop this link in the chat. If you haven't signed up for the challenge yet, please do so. It's right here. If you are watching the replay, you'll find the challenge link in the description as well. It's this bit.ly link right here. But make sure to get rolling with it and dive into it. If you don't have any questions or scenarios that you want to talk about right now, let's dive into the ones that I've collected in advance here. We have 2. I'm going to keep these de-identified just to make sure we respect everyone's privacy. Got one client here, scenario 1. This is a client that, is working with a nutrition coach that's using a tracking-based approach, but the client feels like she's too overwhelmed to track, just flat out doesn't want to. So there's a lot of resistance on that. She's quite a few months into the process, and she's doing some resistance training as well, and she's not keeping up with it. She's made some progress in terms of her mood's better, her digestion's better, her energy levels are better because she started working out a bit, and she's made some progress, but there hasn't been, tons of progress on the scale, which is one of the things that she did want to accomplish. But based on what she's done so far, there's reasons, right? We're always trying to think about, is it what we've done? Is it accountability? Is it what the client's doing in their effort level? To me, as I'm working through this scenario, it does sound like this is on the client, which as people that care, could be really frustrating, right? Because you're trying to think, like, how do I get this person to do this stuff? What do I do? That type of thing. The last thing is, it did sound like based on some of the conversations that they had, this client wanted to, and was telling her coach this, she wanted to delay things until the fall. She's like, things are super busy right now. I'm just going to start this back up in the fall and delay things and kind of go from there. Um, she's got like a bunch of challenges in life, kids and activities, being away, like weekend to weekend, that type of stuff. All that stuff isn't going away anytime soon. Okay, the first thing is, obviously, as a coach, like, let's talk about the last bit for a little bit. Um, as a coach, you're running a business, so you want to keep people on and go from there, especially when we're selling our services month to month. We're trying to, make sure that even if you have a recurring payment system and billing goes through every month, you still want to keep people engaged and keep them on. So there's that onus to like keep people doing the things they need to do. This client, when she says, maybe I'll just postpone things and do things in the fall and get back to it. I think what we want to do in approaches is like, of course you'd want to do that. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? It sounds like things are super busy right now. It sounds like things are pretty overwhelming and you have a lot on your plate and you're having a hard time doing the things you need to do. Obviously, we're going to meet the client where they're at once we went through the steps to see that like she can't do things normally, but we also want to like number one, empathize with her. But number two, like you need to get her to see in her own eyes why it's in her best interest to continue on, even if things aren't perfect. You telling her she can continue on and kind of strong arming yourself into it is great, but it probably won't do the trick because she doesn't see what's in it for her. So some of the things that I like to do is number one, ask her, hey, you know, if you don't stick with things right now and you do take a break, like what happens? Like, how are you going to solve this problem? Because you came to me for a reason. You came to me for these reasons. Bang, bang, bang. What are you going to do? And you'll have a conversation around that. And chances are, it's like, so, I mean, what's going to change that you're doing right now? And is there the potential that things get worse instead of getting better? And then they start to see on their own terms, it's like they need to do this. This is why they signed up for this. This is where they kind of go from there. So I always like to think about, um, you know, thinking about giving them the opportunity to think about what happens if they don't take action. Think about visiting the consequences of not doing the things that they need to do, because that's what's going to get them bought in and do the change and see the things. And without that, you're just going to be constantly telling them, right? So we got to ask those open-ended questions around, like, to get them to see why it's in their best interest and go from there. With this client, it also says she isn't consistently weighing herself, is kind of like, is kind of it sounds like apathetic and has maybe a bad attitude around check-ins and that kind of things. It sounds like this coach is feeling drained by this client, which I can completely understand. But she doesn't want to give up on her because, like, what does that say about the process? So this is a really normal scenario in terms of, like, some clients are going to be like this. It's really strange because you're thinking, this client's investing in this stuff. Obviously, they care enough to take the first step, right? And I think that's a big thing that we got to highlight is, a lot of people don't even ask for help, right? A lot of people don't even go down this path. And I think that in itself is something that needs to be celebrated, right? Like, hey, we're still having this conversation. You're doing this stuff. And I think it's human nature not to think about, it's human nature to compare yourself against where you are right now and where you think you should be, instead of, where you are right now and the progress you've made compared to where you started, right? This one is much better because that's where we're actually going to see progress and we're actually going to be happy with things, instead of this ideal scenario of around where things could be. When we think about where the things that, how things could be constantly, it's never going to be good enough. We're never going to be drained. So for someone like this, I would be constantly reminding him or her how far they've come, even if it hasn't been perfect. And we're just like going through that again and again and again and highlighting that, because again, I wouldn't use this as a marketing message for sure. Like, I wouldn't talk about it on social media the same way, but everyone thinks about how much further they should be along instead of how far they've come. And they don't like to think about, there's a very good chance this client does none of this stuff. She's in a much worse position than she's in. Her mood hasn't got better. Her energy hasn't got better. And even if she hasn't lost much weight, maybe she's gained 10 pounds, right? Like, that's a conversation we need to have, because that's going to get her to see that even though it hasn't been perfect, she's made some progress, and then kind of go from there. But there's also, The flip side is like, you can't care more about this than she does. Like, you really need to get her to see um, why it's in her best interest to do these things, to check in, to make the most of the service, to provide the energy, and thinking about like maybe using analogies around like, is it going to make more sense for her to think this is going to work and be motivated for it to work because we put that energy into, it being positive about it, and like that's on her and that's going to add up. Like, there's so much opportunity for us to dive into the mindset stuff and what's getting in the way of her doing those things, and then kind of going from there would be really what I need to do is really present to her why it's in her best interest. And again, asking questions to get her to see why it's in her best interest, to check in on time and to be enthusiastic and give more information and do what she can. Now, if things aren't going entirely the way we think they should, based on the way we normally do things, there's definitely an opportunity for us to like pull things back and make it less complicated, or pare things back and kind of go from there. Like, maybe tracking all our food isn't in the ticket. Maybe it's just tracking calories and protein, or just tracking protein, or maybe it's just, manual food log and something like that. Obviously, having everything the way we want it objectively and stuff will allow us to be better coaches, but we don't necessarily always need that. And it doesn't mean it needs to stay that way forever. Like, maybe we can build back up to something that's a bit more, the entire package, the full dashboard of values and parameters and that kind of stuff. So there's room for us to step back and look at it that way. Now, what I wouldn't do is automatically regress and do that based on the first sign things aren't going well, which is what a lot of coaches will do, right? Where it's like, oh, we haven't really hit our stride here. Let's think about this differently. And then you're doing that one week and something different the next week and that kind of thing. It's like, we got to reiterate why we need to do things a certain way to the point where they definitely cannot do it, and then go from there. As well as like, there's room for us to, we talked about being positive and getting them to see those things and being supportive, but there's also, room for us to lean out as well and get them to see why it's in their best interest and go from there. So it's like, hey, maybe this isn't the best time. Maybe you don't need this. I know you're really motivated for these reasons and you wanted to achieve this goal. And again, thinking about not only what they wanted to achieve, but why they wanted to achieve it, right? And making sure that they see that, because that's going to be their North Star. That's what they're going to do. That's what's going to help them push through when things are hard, and presenting it that way, and then go from there. So that's what I'm thinking on this client, is that like, this is definitely mindset related. It's definitely behavioral. And we got to think about it that way so that they see what's in their best interest. A little tickly up here today, guys. But that's the first scenario. Any thoughts on that one? Anyone hearing these things and thinking, that makes sense, or, oh, I would go about it that way, or, maybe I never thought about it that way, but that's a good way of presenting this stuff. If there's any thoughts on that, let me know. I'm all ears. Let's go to the second scenario, though, and feel free to drop anything in the chat. Okay, so we got a client here, 53 years old, in perimenopause, menopause since the age of 40. Weight loss has been a massive struggle, even though it's worked with a few different coaches prior to this scenario. In the past last year and a half or so, back issues have escalated. Had an injury 15 years ago, it sounds like. Some disc herniation, nerve impingement, waiting on some news from the surgeon for next steps. It sounds like surgery may be the only route, but this is going to take some time. Sitting is too painful. Walking is too painful. Standing too long is painful. Basically, pain never leaves. Got some medication to help manage the pain. But despite all this, weight loss is still desired. It sounds like the number one question is, does one dive below the BMR with calories to produce this weight loss? Really, really good question. One thing I always like to keep in mind is that like, how much energy someone's ingesting and what they should be doing and technically should doing. It's all on a sliding scale, right? Like, we punch this situation into one of the calculators to get a sense of someone's energy expenditure, so we can give them the amount of food that they need to be eating. And like, it's going to give us one specific number, but the right number is probably within a range and along the range. Daryl says, my biggest struggle is with perimenopausal and menopausal clients. Thank you for this live video. Yeah, like this situation, hormonal situation, it does complicate things a bit and make it harder, but the same principles apply um, in terms of calorie balance, right levels of macronutrients, doing some exercise. The things that are quite a bit different are like, not pushing intense exercise maybe to the same extent because that can backfire, not being so aggressive with a deficit in a lot of scenarios. Where I'm hearing this though, and again, thinking about the sliding scale is like if the client, if she's presenting that, she's not overly hungry, you know, and can't move all that much in terms of, those type of things. Obviously, we're always trying to think about like, well, what can you do? What doesn't hurt? Like, what type of things is it? Um, Walking too long is painful. So do we start to do like, ramp up 8 sessions of, 8-minute walking and thinking about it a little bit differently to manage pain and kind of go from there. So we're always thinking about like those type of things and what you can do. But chances are, based on all that stuff, like maybe there's a sliding scale and maybe she isn't overly hungry and maybe closer to the BMR, even though it's theoretically like maybe what she needs to do to produce weight loss. Right. And I think we want to coach the client in front of us, not just what is theoretical. So if she's doing that and it's enough protein and she's not overly hungry, she may need to diet on less calories than we would think or normally feel comfortable with. Many clients to begin with, especially those perimenopausal and menopausal, like we want to err on the side of more food. And we do that with all clients, right? But specifically those um, in some of those altered hormonal states where things, energy expenditure changes a little bit, and it can be more difficult to lose body fat. But at the end of the day, like the same principles will apply, and that might be the trade-off. So chances are, like you might need to go a little bit deeper into a deficit with this one specifically, see how it goes, and if she's not overly hungry, then kind of go from there. With that being said, we also need to like as a client-centered coach, I always want to think about what does the client want and how do I help them get there and what's in their best interest, because typically what the client wants is always going to be in their best interest, and if you don't help them in a way that reduce some of the risks, they're going to find someone else to do it and help them and that kind of thing. And that's just kind of my philosophy on this stuff. But at the end of the day, it might be worth thinking, does the risk of pushing this too hard and trying to lose weight, does it impair recovery? Does it make it harder long term? Like maybe we think about shifting more to maintenance and focusing on doing as much as activity as you can do, and not trying to lose weight, because sometimes, focusing more on performance and that kind of thing will produce some of the changes in leanness that we want to anyway, because if we're so fixated on something, it's one of those things where it can get in our way. We start to create some of our own barriers. We start to become like we do things that we normally wouldn't, that can get in the way. So those are some of the things that I think about and go from there. The difficulty is the inability to exercise. The biggest hammer here is the nutrition side. So yes, go with lower calories, but want energy. I think the biggest thing being, I'd always think about what the client's thinking. And if they're not overly hungry, then I think that's just as much your answer as, are they below the BMR? Are they that kind of thing? Because again, everyone's on a sliding scale. Like I've had clients, in their 60s, smaller individuals be on, less than 1,200 calories, which again, you like read enough on the internet that's like, faux pas. How can you be doing that? It's like what a growing toddler consumes. It's like, well, that's a growing toddler. It is different. And there's a difference between, again, obviously not saying that this client isn't being truthful, because I think they are, but there's a difference between being what someone should be doing and what they're actually doing. And they are kind of apples and oranges, right? So it's like someone should be eating 1,200 calories theoretically. Are they? And if they're reporting that, chances are it is a little bit more, albeit trying to do their best within that. So can one treat it like a cut with a refeed strategy? Yeah, totally. I think the biggest thing being, especially if that refeed strategy or, maybe higher calorie day once per week just allows them to manage the rest of the low days, I think that'd be definitely a viable strategy. But I think for the most part, like chances are this person will need to go lower, especially if weight loss is the ultimate goal and they're okay with some of the drawbacks and stuff and kind of going from there. So I think you maybe need to play around with stuff. Maybe it's a bit more aggressive and spending more time in maintenance, right? Maybe some like more like quicker phases and that kind of thing. Get in, get out. Try it that way. Maybe breaking up what they can do, with exercise, and then go from there would be what I'm thinking. Anyone else have any other scenarios? Those are the two that I had prepared for today. Emily Ann, Daryl, anything comes to mind? Anything that you've done with some of your perimenopausal, menopausal clients? Yeah, no problem, David. Let me know, guys. And if you're watching the replay and you want to ask a question, by all means, drop it in there and I'll get to it tomorrow or later on this weekend. If you haven't joined our free challenge yet, by all means, check it out. It's really, really good. I'll drop the link again here, but it'll also be in the description. It's excellent. I've had people saying, I've been coaching for a few years and this really solidified a lot of things for me, remove some barriers to do different things. It's helping me have some conversations. It's helping me structure my business. So make sure you check it out. If there aren't any other questions for today, we'll conclude our office hours. I love doing these. I love the live videos. If you have any ideas for videos or things you want me to cover, let me know. Send me an email and we'll go from there. But outside of that, we're going to end her there for today. Take care, guys. Oh, I've heard fats over carbs for menopause, but does this still depend on the individual? Yeah. I would still say between those things, personal preference is probably the most important aspect, but there's some limited research to suggest that erring on the side of more fats than carbs comparatively can be helpful, to the extent though that you don't drop carbs so much that it starts to impact stress levels and that kind of stuff as well, because that's the issue with some of these overly aggressive approaches. Would be like, you want to find that sweet spot between all that stuff, and ultimately the most important thing is like sticking with it. But sometimes moderate protein, lower carb, moderate fat can be helpful for menopause. But I think for the most part, it always comes down to personal preference. All right. That's it for right now, guys. Let me know if there's anything else. Take care.